The primary purpose of Innovative AAC Solutions, the podcast, is to educate and inform. The views expressed during all episodes are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute educational or medical advice. They are not necessarily the views of Special School District of St. Louis County. Hey everybody, welcome back to Innovative AAC Solutions. We're your hosts, Laura Hayes.
And Bridget Sahlberg.
And we are wrapping up this season of GLP and AAC, and we have two jam-packed interviews for you guys to listen to. The first is I know it's going to speak to our listeners, Bridget, because it's all about AAC in the classroom and what that can look like for GLPs. I am curious, for someone who is supporting a GLP in the classroom, who is like, where do I get started? How do I model gestalts in a classroom? What does that even look like? What should I be doing? What would you say to them?
Yeah, what I found successful as an SLP in the classroom was really being cognizant and finding time during my lessons to model, 3 to 5 gestalts per activity. And that carryover piece is so important with teachers, with paras, with other therapists, with related services. So what I would do is plan out those 3 to 5, and I would literally take an activity, let's say reading a book, and then I would write down what I'm going to say, like, I'm ready to read. Let's turn the page. That's so funny, or that's so silly. That's so sad. Look at that. And that's and then whatever nouns that they might be labeling. So really nice, mitigable, stage 1, typically gestalts. And then I could give it to other service providers as well, so that they have that carryover and that we're all kind of as a team focused and building gestalts into routines, building gestalts into the plan itself. And one step further would be, if there are other providers who need a little extra support with each AAC system, would be then to map out smart charts and use our software editing systems and actually have the, symbol let's, then turn, then and then the symbol for page, so that other people can expose these students to those same pathways and kind of reduce some of those friction points that we all feel when we're modeling on AAC.
I love that example because I think, we talk about a classroom, but we read books at home, we read books in lots of different environments. We know a lot of our GLPs are uh, drawn to books and the predictability and structure of those books and patterns. And so I kind of love that example. And I think what people find daunting is they think it has to be different gestalts all the time, but so many of those are general gestalts that would apply to multiple activities. And then the idea of making language visible in those environments, I think that applies to so beyond the classroom too, right? Whether or not you just do a smart chart like you're saying and print those and give those visual supports in a light tech form, or maybe you put it on a mid-tech switch and you put it next to the bookshelf, and so then you say let's read, or like the one you said, it's time to read, something along those lines, so that we're just making language visible in a very easy, natural way that doesn't feel like extra work. It's already something that's built in, so we want it to be easy for both the AAC user and the communication partner. So thanks for sharing those. I want to share some more though. I got to sit down with Tracey Hill, who is a classroom teacher for an autism classroom in the Rockwood School District. And we really sat down and talked about some other resources, some strategies, and supports that she's doing in her classroom full of GLP AAC users. So without further ado, let's lead into our interview with Tracey Hill. Welcome back, everybody, to Innovative AAC Solutions. I'm Laura Hayes, and I'm hosting today with the wonderful Tracey Hill. Tracey, I am so glad you got to jump on with us today. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Uh,
Hopefully it's great.
it's going to be great. I know it will be. I have known you for a few years now, and I have nothing but positive things to say about you and your classroom as as a teacher, how well you support your students, but I know you a little bit. If someone is listening that doesn't know you like I do, can you give them a little background about just your history as a teacher and, what your exposure has been like with AAC?
Yeah, of course. I taught general education for about 6 years before I flipped to the special ed side. This is my 10th year, ninth or 10th with SSD. I started out kind of as like resource, switched a couple different districts, and then this is my fourth year in a self-contained or centers-based AU classroom. And this is my second year in Rockwood School District at Blevins Elementary in an AU classroom.
And you've worked with all ages too, right?
Um,
Or has it
no,
mostly been
I
okay?
no, I did teach early childhood, general education and special ed. I did 2 years of special ed, um, early childhood. But the highest I've ever taught was fifth grade.
Okay. Okay. So I know things have shifted for you and the fact that you've done general education, special education, you kind of got the gamut there. But this whole season is about Gestalt language processors particularly in the world of education. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about your experience as a teacher with Gestalt language processors? Maybe what it was like before you had any training and what it's kind of like now.
Well, the first training I had was about a month ago with you, Laura, which was fantastic. But before then, I was just teaching resource, mostly for fifth graders in Ladue at the fifth grade center. And I had no experience with kids that were nonverbal, kids that used AAC devices, kids that were Gestalt language learners. And I was just kind of thrown into it. My first 2 years, I had a classroom of 10 students, and we were mixed between students that had Down syndrome that were nonverbal, and I had students that had autism that were verbal and nonverbal. I don't think I ever heard the term GLPs until partway through last school year. Justine, our SLP, and I, we kind of started getting into this together, and it completely makes sense now. But I spent probably 2 years doing this, having no idea what I was doing, just kind of making it work and just whatever I thought was best for the student with the whole student in mind.
And that was one of the things that I took note of even when I started working with you guys is some of the supports you had in place. So could you describe some of those in the classroom that you have for your students to try to help adapt, meet their needs?
I think the most important is visuals, visuals everywhere, whether it's printed on board maker or photographs that I've taken, just little clip art things. I think that's very important for students that I can refer to it and then they can refer back to it. The first few things that I started working with was just like a simple yes and a no on a piece of paper. Like yes was like green and no was red. And we know that every single behavior from students is an attempt at some type of communication. So as I was going through that and a student was angry or agitated, I would just try to model back, like, you're telling me no, or you're telling me I don't like this. And the most important thing for students, besides the visuals, is just having the ability to be heard. I think that's the most important for kids is even if I don't understand, even if there's some speech sounds or no speech sounds, or it's just kind of jargon or babbling, just to say, I hear you. I know you're trying to tell me something. I'm sorry I don't understand. Can you try again? Can you try differently? Can you show me? And just honoring every single form of communication, I think, is the most important for students that do have verbal words and for students that don't have verbal words.
I couldn't have put that better myself.
Oh.
I always describe Tracy as kind of an honorary SLP in the way that you think and the way that you describe some things in the classroom because it's just so in line with what we know is important as speech language pathologists, right? Language and communication are at the crux of so many communication breakdowns and communication successes. And if we don't have that, we lose the heart of connection and then the ability to learn. The other thing, though, I wanted to point out, and maybe we could talk about this briefly, is what kind of sensory supports you put in your classroom to help with regulation and in moments of dysregulation.
Oh, for sure. I have an entire area in my classroom that is the sensory area. So I have everything from trampolines and crash pads for the kids that need that deep pressure. So jumping on the trampoline and then crashing onto the crash pad. I have drawers full of like pom-poms or like I kind of call it like party grass, but it's like the things that you would hang in a doorway. We call it the rainbows, but it's like silver and shiny, and they love to like pull it and put it on their head. I have another kid who puts a ball in it and spins it like a Harlem Globetrotter, and just I like to watch it to see the stuff going around and around. It is really cool. So for my kiddos that need that spinning, that vestibular, I have like wobble stools or spinning chairs. And then also I have a squeeze machine. And then I guess I say I kind of invented this, but 2 years ago, I started something that we call the ball squishes. And basically, I have a large yoga ball that the kids that like it will lay flat on the ground. And then I just roll the ball like by pushing really hard, just kind of up and down on the back, the arms straight out. The torso area, I kind of just roll the ball. I don't put pressure, but on the legs and the arms, and then they flip over and they like to sing like a little roll over song. So we do it when they're face down and face up for the kids that need that extra, like squishing, that extra piece of it. So I have scheduled sensory breaks in the classroom, and then if a kid is requesting or advocating for a sensory break, I absolutely honor that. And then also a lot of my students, when they earn their time at the end, when we do the token charts, they will choose the sensory area.
Yep. And then the last thing, just as far as setting up this environment, because even at the last training we did, there were so many teachers that had takeaways of like, I'm going to change my classroom to put in some of these modifications and accommodations to help with regulation. And so I think sometimes we can take for granted, like we have all these things in place that seem second nature, but some staff don't have that, or even some therapists don't have that. And dysregulation is the number one concern. So I love these concrete examples you've given. The other thing, though, that I notice when I come to your classroom specifically, Tracey, is how you have a lot of materials that can be adapted for the students' individual interests, and you kind of embed that into their routine and then their academic content and make those modifications. Could you give the listeners maybe just one or two examples of those as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to create stuff that is tailored for the kiddos, especially ones that would have like fine motor concerns or we're not really like a paper pencil worksheety kind of classroom. That's not setting our students up for success. Well, at least not my students. But I will adapt things or like I will do some worksheets for some of my students that are a little bit higher functioning that do have some of those fine motor skills, or maybe I have goals of them for starting and completing a task. But instead of using like a pencil on the paper, we will write it on a dry erase board. Or yesterday we were doing beginning letter sounds with pictures, and I ended up just writing all of them on a piece of construction paper. And then I put lines like a grid. And so the students cut across the paper to cut out the letters and then glued them onto the spot where they would go instead of picking up a pencil and trying to write the letter C or the letter B. And it worked out really well. And actually, I have one student who English is not his first language, and his parents speak Farsi at home. We're really trying to get some communication things put in place for him. But afterwards, I went back and I told him, like, where's the can? Where's the man? Where's the ball? And he was able to point to all of them. So I thought, oh my gosh, this is awesome. He kind of does understand what I'm saying.
Oh, I
And
love
so
this.
he is nonverbal. He has not a lot of babbling, not much jargon. There really isn't any verbalizations that come out, but for him to understand and be able to point to what I was saying was really cool.
Yeah, I love that so much. And again, just the way that you're adapting things keeps attention and helps with that overall multimodal learner, kinesthetic, getting the cutting feedback, visual, tactile, auditory, all of that, I think just helps that learning process. So we've talked about the fact that you really just had a formal training pretty recently with Gestalt language processors. What have you found helpful? What is still hard in the classroom? Like what changes have you made that you've seen benefits to, and what are you still struggling with?
Well, I mean, I do struggle with knowing the difference between like level one, two, and three with the Gestalt language, learners. But one of the biggest takeaways that I got kind of earlier this year, which I've incorporated into the whole school now, so I'll tell you about that in a second, but is to understand that like typical language learners, we'll see something in like doggy, and then the next one is a doggy, but then the rabbit is a doggy, and then the elephant is a doggy. And so that's kind of how the typical language develops, but understanding that a Gestalt language learner is almost the opposite of that. Like it's not a doggy, it's a German Shepherd. And then the next one is, a Labradoodle or whatever, like, and then it's harder for them to understand that all of those different dogs are dogs. But then an elephant is an elephant, but a dog, an elephant, and a giraffe are all animals. And so I think that's where I've kind of tried to put my mind around it and just understanding the phrases and kind of changing those up. Justine and I, we would do like look up, look at this, look at that, look over there. And so just taking a word and putting it into a phrase and then kind of adapting the phrase. It was a really cool thing that we did with some bubbles in the classroom, and we were doing look up. So I was standing on a step stool, blowing the bubbles at the ceiling so that they had to look up to see them. And two of my little new kindergartners were able to follow the eye gaze but towards about the end of the second week of doing that. But I thought that was really cool. But I also do a program called Best Buddies after school. It's gen ed kids, and it's just partnering and like fostering relationships between kids that have special needs and kids that don't. And that was last week was our first like meeting or activity. And I did a whole kind of PowerPoint for the kids to understand what I was talking about. Like a typical language developer, like everything's a dog, even the turtle, even the cat. But for Gestalt language learners, it's very specifically the actual animal, but not necessarily an understanding of the animal families.
Mm.
And you
I
could
think that's an
see them.
interesting.
Yeah, they were just like, what? Like, I think it's really hard to understand and hard to believe that.
Yeah. A couple of things that I just want to touch on too is I like the distinction that you're kind of making with how, you know, a an analytic, you said typical, but I think you meant analytic language learner. So these are both two, just a reminder to our listeners, these are both two naturally developing types of ways to process language. So it's not that one is typical and one is atypical. Like they're two natural ways to develop language, but they're different in the way that you develop them. And so you have your analytic language processor, like Tracey mentioned, where they are going to reference things and what we would call in the language world overgeneralize. Every mom or every female is a mom and every animal
Hmm.
is a dog, right? And until you are able to kind of differentiate. Whereas in the Gestalt language processor's mind, everything is very rigid to an experience. So the German Shepherd might be the German Shepherd in the photo, and that's the only German Shepherd. And then, then you have a cow on the farm, but a cow is only a black and white.
Hmm.
I don't even know all the different types of cows, so I'm not gonna like
Yeah.
butcher that, but just a very specific type of cow, a Betsy that like is gonna be specific to that individual concept, and we're not gonna generalize very quickly. And so they need more gestalts, more things that they can break apart, and more experiences that are dynamic in nature, like the bubble activity that you so beautifully did alongside your SLP. And even just the beauty of you guys treating together and having the same knowledge in the background. And then let's talk about the fact that then you carried it over to Gen Ed and the power of peer models. I mean, I'm sure they just ate that up.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it went over really well. I'm going to talk some more about autism at our next Best Buddies. But at the beginning of the school year, I have 7 students this year, and I went into 5 of the 7 students' homerooms class and talked to their peers, their gen ed peers, and the teachers just about their AAC devices and how those are their words and how they treat them. And, like sometimes they don't want to answer. And, just talking about like the power of they have these words or I call them their words, but they have their device, their AAC device, but they may not choose to be talking. And that's okay. Just like if you ask somebody who is verbal, they might not want to answer you. And so just honoring that also. And then we just talked about autism and sensory supports and, sensory overload. And all the teachers said that all the kids were just like asking a million questions after I left. And I'm like, okay, write them down. Like, I'll try to answer all of them. But I think it just instilled like that student is part of the class. This is how they're part of the class. And this is how you can be friends with somebody who has autism.
Amazing. I love that. I love that so much. Lots and lots of waves happening at your guys' school, and I think it's so helpful for other people to hear because I think it can feel really
Mm.
hard to make some of those changes and just ride the waves as they come and also take manageable steps towards that. So one of the other things, so most of your students who are non-speaking have robust AAC with a speech generating device, but you guys also have, one of the things I like to talk about is how it's not a either or, right? It's not light tech or high tech. It's a yes and. So you guys have a wide range. You have light, mid, and high tech in the classroom. So we've talked a little bit about the high tech devices. What can you talk a little bit more about the light tech and even maybe the mid tech that you guys incorporate?
Yeah, I mean, simple like I'll like little like squares of like almost like PEX cards, but just, like yes or no or sit or stand. I try to do more with the light tech visuals versus like consistently verbally repeating the direction. That works a lot better for our kiddos. Also on the light tech side, for 2 of my kiddos who are reading some words, when there is frustration or I see some behaviors coming, sometimes I will write the direction on the dry erase board and let them see it versus me telling them, because then it feels like more of a command and a demand that I'm giving versus they can just see it and then try to follow it. So I think that works really well. We also have 2 like boards, I guess is what you call them, or Laura, you can correct me, but in the classroom. And so I have one in my sensory area. I mean, it's pretty big. It's like,
Poster size,
well, it's bigger than
wall
poster
size.
size.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a wall size, half of a wall size, but it has some of those ones that you use all the time, like the yes, the no, the I want. And so when we're in the sensory area and, I'll do more and then I'll point to more on there. And so for my students that are nonverbal that might not have their words or their AAC device in that sensory area, we can still use that kind of medium tech to communicate or to request. And then I also have a smaller poster size one up by my smart board, which is where we lead our social language groups. And then they always have their words on the carpet with their binders and visuals, but I can also point to that at the same time versus always trying to model on their devices for them.
And I'm trying to remember because there's multiple classrooms in your school. Do you have any students with the dynamic Gestalt books as well?
No.
The flip books? Okay. That's some of Justine's other
Oh,
students.
well, I think so. Are you I think
It's
you're
the
talking
flip book.
about my third grader.
Yeah.
We're working on like that's cool. And yes, I do. I have one student who does not have an AAC device. We do have that. I'll bring it out during like social language groups, and I'll mainly use it just to try to model to get some of that language that's not just scripting, but to just kind of like, I like that, or that's cool, or do it again. So yeah, if that's what that's
Mhm.
called. Sorry.
Yeah, no, no, that's perfect. And one thing I was going to add to that is so, you're talking about scripting for that particular student, and someone might be able to relate to this. It's you guys honor all of the scripts, but he can get kind of stuck into those longer scripts, and that can be really hard to mitigate down the road. So one of the strategies that we talked about is giving shorter, more mitigable scripts in a variety of language functions. And so that book just provides those additional models for the communication partners to kind of give around meaningful experiences to kind of help him hear those that can be a little bit more mitigable compared to some of the longer
Mhm.
scripts that he's kind of running in his head, that are potentially, arguably, a little bit more internal and not communicating to a communication partner, regulatory, if you will.
Yeah, and for this specific student who is very verbal, but a lot of his communication is not necessarily functional communication. It's just that scripting communication. I always repeat what he says, like, if the bus is yellow, the bus is yellow. I'm like, oh, the bus is yellow. But if we're doing something else, we're doing a math problem, they're like, oh, you're talking about the bus is yellow. Well, what color is this? So I'll try to choose something in the script that he is talking about and then try to tailor it slightly to what we're doing, but still honoring that he's trying to talk to me about a bus. Or I'll try to go into that conversation like, what bus is yellow? Like, is it the school bus or is it the city bus? And then I'll try to like go back into what we were trying to do. Sometimes it works, sometimes we're kind of stuck on that. But then I'll just tell him, like, I hear you. I hear what you're saying. You're talking about the bus. Now it's time to, and then follow it with what, like, do your math.
Yeah, yeah. Because and that's one of the things I know gets a lot of critique is that, these students that are stuck in stage one and stage two, well, the ideal situation would be to be able to honor them and do play-based therapy all day, every day. But we have academic constraints that we have to
Mhm.
complete when we're at school. And so it's this balance. And the examples I think you're giving are so helpful, Tracey, because I think that it hits home at how we recognize you still have to create and complete academic content. Like the standards are there. We are surrounded by this structure, and we cannot change that. The constraints are there, but we can still honor the space that they're in. We can still help them with their language skills in that space and work with other team members, mainly OT, PT, speech, ABA, all of our team members that we know are providing supports to help meet them where they're at, modify and accommodate as appropriate, and still give them that structure that we know is in the constraints of a school day and academic content.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's difficult sometimes. And I think for myself personally, sometimes I struggle with thinking that, or, like, oh my gosh, they're not making progress. We're not getting academic progress because we're having all these behaviors. But I feel like it's a mindset change, and it's hard for lots of people to understand that it's okay to put those academics on the back burner because we don't need to sit there and memorize sight words. What we need is functional communication, social communication, turn taking, following directions. Like all of these things need to come before we can memorize or learn sight words or multiplication. And I think it's hard. And I think you almost, as a teacher, have to give yourself like leeway into like, okay, I can do this, but we don't need to do it right now. Like, first, it's communication. Communication is the basis for everything because every single behavior that we have is an attempt for the kid to communicate something.
Mhm.
We just got to work through and kind of figure out what it is. And the academics will come. Not
Mhm.
saying we can't go an entire year with making no academic progress on IEP goals, but it's okay to know that it will come later, to focus on those more functional skills and communication first.
Yeah, and I think you can still scaffold it, like you scaffold things,
Mhm.
right? Providing reduced choices, giving those visuals, and
Mhm.
making those accommodations in the interim while trying to build that language. Because my big aha when I learned and talked and dove into all that is Gestalt language processing is they really can't access understanding of a question that's presented to them in academics until stage 3 and 4 when they can pull out words. And so if that is the expectation, whether it be about a book or whether that be a question about math content or a sight word, to expect them to be able to answer that when they're in stage 1 and stage 2, if they learn it, it's a rote response that they've learned in a rigid context, like the German Shepherd that we were talking about, right? So what have we taught them? We've taught them to memorize. It's a little bit of a trick and pony show. And then they don't generate it. They don't make the natural language connection so that when they go home, they can't share any of that knowledge with a family member or to the next grade that they go to, even though they've learned it in that rote context. And so I think just to reemphasize your point, like we have to help them make the language connections so that we can get there. An it isn't a not right now. It's just a not yet.
Yeah. And
So
I think part of it too is that, we'll have these kids that are super, super struggling, but like the viewpoint of others is like, but they're reading, they can read. And I feel like if we don't take all of these steps backwards, we're almost allowing or kind of making kids become hyperlexic and just the memorization piece. And I do have a kid who can read words, but if I do a consonant, vowel, consonant, nonsense word, he cannot sound them out whatsoever because I have to go 8 steps back and I'm trying to teach letter sounds.
Mhm.
And so, like, that phonemic awareness and that phonics piece isn't there, but he can read the word hippopotamus and he can read the word recess and he can read these other words, but it's just that memorization piece that you were just talking about and just kind of that hyperlexic type of like, but we need more than memorization. We need to go back steps before memorization.
And that's the processing piece, right? Like they can express something. I relay that example also to when someone is echolalic, right? They're like, well, they can talk. They don't need an AAC device. I'm like, they can say what you said last,
Yeah.
but are they spontaneously generating it on their own to tell you about what they believe, what they think, what their original thought is? And if that's not happening, then we really need to take a step back and see where they're at processing wise, and then meet them where they're at for processing, whether that be at stage 1 or stage 2, and look at robust AAC. So I think it's similar because it's there that student that's hyperlexic is also similar to that student that's echoic in that they're still processing language in the same way. They're likely at stage 1 or stage 2 of
Mhm.
Gestalt language development.
Mhm.
Okay, what else would you want someone to know who supports Gestalt language learners in either speech or in the classroom?
I think just to know it goes throughout the entire day. It's not just in the classroom, it's during specials, it's at lunch, it's at recess, it's honoring requests and honoring attempts at communication without like trying to make the kid conform to how you want them to answer it. So we have kids with AAC devices, and I think the AAC device is more than just like requesting and answering questions. We're not to the point where we're using it for like commenting or protesting or like those other pieces of communication, but the AAC device is more than just saying like, what do you want to eat? And then pushing the apple for eat and then pulling it up. And it's like, oh, you want a cracker? Do you want a cracker? Do you want a cracker? And then they push cracker and it's like, yay, they did it. But I feel like it's so much more than that. And if a kid is reaching for the cracker, that's telling me they want the cracker. I'm not going to not give them the cracker and make them do cracker on the AAC device. I would model back like, oh, you're saying yes, you want the cracker. So then I would tell them like, I have something to say. Like, can I see your words? I have something to say. And I think the hardest part is trying not to use their words when they don't want you to.
Mm.
And modeling on the AAC devices is one way to do it, but if they're kind of like pulling them back, I think honor that too. Like, oh, you're telling me you don't want me to touch that right now. Like, that's okay. I'm just going to tell you, like, you're saying you wanted the cracker.
Mhm.
So I think so much of what I watched with paras specifically is like they'll say, do you want more? Do you want more? And then the kid is reaching for it. Well, they're telling us yes. That means they want more. So we just have to honor that. Like, and then you can sign back, like, you're telling me more, or you're saying yes, or do it on the AAC device or the picture card. But I think so much of it is trying to have the kids do it on the device, but we're not honoring that they tried to communicate 3 steps prior to that.
Yep. Yep. And you guys are amazing at that. And I really think that culture is kind of, it does go across the day. So that was going to be my, follow-up question is any other strategies that you guys have done to help that partner learning, whether it be a para or a substitute or someone in the classroom, and helping them understand that these are the strategies that work for GLPs?
Yeah, I mean, I have para meetings like usually about 2 a month where I'll just start an agenda. The team, we do it together. So it's me, the SLP, and the OT. And we'll just we have our own team meetings, and then we'll take stuff from our team meetings to the para meetings so that we'll talk to the paras about like what we've noticed or what is working, or try this instead, or this is one way to do it, and it's just modeling, not only modeling to the kids, but modeling to all the adults. And I think that is the most important too, is, just honoring whatever that communication is. And even if it's something that they can't have or they can't do, it's, I hear you. I know you want the iPad, but this is what we're doing. And, first this, then this, the token charts, the visuals, the timers. I think it's all part of helping kids understand the concept of this is what I want, but this is what I'm doing first. And one of the other things I always say, it's communication over compliance.
Mhm.
Like, we're not trying to make them comply. We're trying to help them communicate so that they understand that they are going to get and they will get what they're wanting. But that's where the hard part comes between like the academic piece. We have to do this, but there's 10 other ways we can do it to set it up for success first before we have the behaviors and the communication breakdown.
Right. And again, if it's not working, don't blame it on like if the flower isn't blooming, like don't blame it on the flower, blame it on what's enriching the flower, right? So in this example, like, okay, well, they're not able to show us that they can do multiplication. So like, how could we do this differently? How could we create a different type of setting or activity to help them learn, or maybe it is take a couple steps back, but we can still do something in the realm of math to hit those markers, but also meet them where they're at. And you do such a good job. The other thing I wanted to point out, though, and I think it could be easily overlooked, is having those communication meetings as a team.
Mhm.
Collaboration sounds so simple, but I think we've talked a lot in this episode about having the freedom and honoring and acknowledging people's voice. Honoring everybody's voice at the table by having some of these touch point meetings can be so important. So, because we know paraprofessionals are at the heart of so many points of the day of students, and they need to have a voice too. They need to be able to talk through things, ask questions, and say like, "Well, why are we doing it this way? Maybe we should try it a different way." And I think that culture is brought about through some of the things you've mentioned so far. So, just
Yeah.
wanted to mention that too.
Yeah. I mean, our paras are our frontline workers. They really are. And I think it's absolutely important to explain the why behind things, because sometimes it's like it's a hard pill to swallow for people, specifically paras, who think like they can do more, they can do more, they should be doing this. And it's like, but, and just explaining the why behind why we're doing something so simple, because I wanted them to look at the peer and pass them the item.
Mhm.
Like, that's what we were focused on. Yes, they're so far beyond what that activity was, but there's underlying goals within things that are pre-academics also.
Mhm.
And just making, sorry, the lights went out.
You're
And
good.
just like, being able to make choices or pick something.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of it.
Well, and I would say almost every single paraprofessional that I have worked with wants the child to succeed.
Oh,
So
yeah.
there's when they do something that might not be best practice, like do a hand over hand prompt or give a tactile input or say more after they've already shown that they want something, it's because they're well intended. They want them to do what they think is right. They just don't realize that there's more power in them doing something independently than helping them do that, and in some cases causing some prompt dependency. But it's not because they don't have the best of expectations and the best intentions behind it. I love this idea of having some touch points and then just talking things through and then talking them through again and troubleshooting as a team. I think if you're not already doing that, I think it's a really great strategy to start. Okay, we've been chatting for a bit, but I can't let you go, Tracey, before I ask you what I ask all of our interviewees, which is what is your favorite AAC moment to date, either with an AAC user or maybe one with yourself involved? You get bonus points if it's a Gestalt language processor, but it doesn't have to be.
So it actually just happened like 2 hours ago. And I hadn't put much thought into this because I was like, I'll just come up with something. But we were at Special Olympics bowling, and I have a kindergarten student. He is nonverbal. He does have some like babbling. We've been working really hard this school year on trying to look at letters and like kinesthetically like make a sign or like a verbal response to it. So he has some, I haven't heard like consonant vowel. I don't know exactly what you would hear it say. Like, what is that called? Is that babbling?
Yeah,
Or
it can be. Yeah.
I haven't heard much of that, but he will make some consonant sounds like for cookie.
Uh-huh.
Um, he is very much a Gestalt language learner. He loves his grandpa. His grandpa picks him up. And so anytime that there is an older gentleman anywhere, he points and he says, and I'm like, oh, do you think that looks like an older man? Does that look like a grandpa? But today we were at Special Olympics bowling and he was frustrated and he wanted to get back on the bus. I think the bowling alley was just kind of loud and he was pointing and yelling and at the door. And I said, I know. I said, I think you're telling me you want to get on the bus. I said, you like the bus. And he was saying, buh, 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 buh. And I was like, I hear you. I was like, you like the bus. I'm like, first we're going to do this, then we're going to get on the bus. And I just kept talking to him. I'm like, you like the bus. I said, you like it, the bus. And he looked right at me and said, bus. Clear as day. I've never heard him say a word. And I don't think his family has either. So I'm in the middle of the bowling alley pulling out my phone and emailing his mom, like, what bus? And so she's like, oh my gosh. And so, but he's never said a word. But I think just constantly modeling my verbal language back to him. Clear as day, he said, bus. I was like,
Yeah.
oh. So I had to go around and tell everybody. I'm
Well,
like, he just said this. He just said this.
and here's the thing is we know that those words in highly emotional,
Hmm.
meaningful events can be generated. And so to me, what that meant is that you were connecting beyond just giving him a model. You were connecting on an emotional basis and you were honoring and acknowledging and helping with that regulatory piece too. I just think that's so powerful.
Yeah, and I try to do more than just labeling. Like
Hmm.
I was telling him, like, oh, you're telling me you like the bus. The bus is fun. And so he said bus. It was very exciting. So
That's
I had to
so
tell everybody
exciting.
that was there.
That's amazing. That's so
Yeah.
amazing.
Now again, he just echoed it. It wasn't spontaneous, but it was amazing. That was like the first step. I mean, I haven't even heard a consonant vowel, much less a word like that, a
But
verbal word.
but again, it was imitative, but the intent, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, he looked directly at you, like calmed. It sounds like he calmed his body and then was
Hmm.
like, "Here's the word." Like,
Yep.
yes, like I and like let's do it now.
I know. There was a para standing right next to me because I had bent down. I was like almost on the ground, like kind of at like eye level. And she was standing up. And I looked up at her and I said, oh my God, did you hear that? And she goes, yeah. And I was like, oh, somebody else heard
I
it.
have a witness.
I
Yeah. And
know.
this is a newer student to you guys, right?
Yeah, he's a kindergartner.
So like I think I know this student and I know how much you guys have been just immersing him and making
Yeah.
language visible for him. And this has not been a short this, we know that AAC in language is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And so it can feel, I know people are listening and they have these moments where it can feel like we're not making progress, like we're just continuing to model, we're presuming competence, and then all of a sudden it just starts to click. So whether or not this completely clicks and he takes off, or whether this is still a slow ride, you had this amazing moment where there's shared connection and the communication, right? That's the take home message. It's not about compliance. It's about bus, Tracy. Like I'm gonna look
Yes,
right at you.
bus. I was like, I hear you. I was so excited. And I was like, I hear you. You're saying bus. I'm like, thanks for telling me. You like, and I just said it over and over and over again. And then he was smiling, but like almost like we had that moment where he understood that I understood him.
Mhm.
And like it was just really cool. Because I repeat it. Like I was assuming that he wanted the bus. And I don't know that, but he was pointing at the door. I know he likes the bus. So I put two and two together. But just the moment where he said bus to me and he knew that I understood him, even though I was saying it back to him, it was just like, and he was just smiling and it was really cool.
That's amazing. Well, I feel like there's so many take home points that listeners can grab a hold to and make some feasible changes. If anybody has any questions or follow up things, or like maybe it's just like, where did you grab the trampoline or this resource or the big wall size poster board? What's the best way to reach out to you?
Yeah, you can email me through Rockwood. It's Hill Tracy, Tracey, at rsdmo.org. That would be the best way. I check that all the time.
Perfect. Well, we just want to thank you for coming on today on behalf of Innovative AAC Solutions. I'm Laura Hayes, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks, Laura.
Fun find. Today I'm going to show you block play people. You can find this in the IRC. This is what they look like. These block play people are great for modeling a variety of gestalts. So for stage 1, we could say things like, we need help. I can fix it. That's not a problem. Let's look over there. I found it. So a lot of good variety of gestalts. For stage 2, we could say, it's a doctor. It's a mailbag. Let's see the teacher. Let's fix the problem. Where's the businesswoman? And then stage 3, we would really be, using those referential people, places, and the items that they're holding and colors, any descriptors. So like doctor's mask, businesswoman's phone, her briefcase, scientist goggles, all those more specific terms that they can then free up and use appropriately and have a really fun time playing with these block people. And I think that this would actually be good for a variety of different ages too. It's very realistic looking. And I think sometimes we as educators can kind of place our thoughts on using like figurines in classrooms. And some of our older students really actually enjoy them and get a lot out of it, especially if they're in stages 1 through 3 with Gestalt language processing. Give it a try. It's in the IRC. I hope you enjoy it.